on national security strategy. Today we're holding a further evidence session. Today's one is on the national security strategy, which of course was published at the end of June. Can I start by welcoming the witnesses and asking them to introduce themselves?
My name's Pat McFadden. I'm the Chancellor of the Duchy of Lancaster.
And Matt Collins, Deputy National Security Advisor.
Thank you. And just to explain, we have several votes going on in the laws. A vote right now, and I think there'll be a further vote in an hour and a half, but hopefully it will not be as disrupted as we first feared. So thank you for your patience anyway, as others may stream in. If I could just start, first of all, by thanking you for joining us today, and appreciate the letter that you sent us, Pat, on the 19th of June, confirming, A, that you'll be attending today, but also confirming that the NSA, Jonathan Powell, would also come before us. It is, of course, I think 2.5 years now since this committee had an NSA in front of it. I think it was, is it Tim Barrow, back in February 2023. Can I just ask, why was it not possible for us to have some formal confirmation before the publication of the National Security Strategy?
Well, I'm a great believer in ministerial accountability, and that ministers should obviously appear before select committees of both houses. The National Security Advisor has periodically appeared before this committee or its predecessors in the past. The rules state ultimately this is up to ministers in terms of deciding whether it's special advisors or civil servants to appear. The National Security Advisor is a special advisor. That's unusual, but I think it's right that I came to the decision I did in the end, because I understand the committee's desire to hear from him, and he does occupy a specific position in this sphere, which is obviously important.
Our letter obviously highlighted concerns that we held, and I think really that both houses held, and that is about the future risk of other appointments being special advisors, and therefore the how this might impact on future accountability. Do you accept that is a risk?
I think the accountability is always in the end through ministers, but I understand the committee's desire to have the NSA give evidence, and he's indicated that he's happy to do that.
And could you give us an indication of roughly when that might be? Will that be within the next couple of months? Because he's now been in post a year.
Do you meet during the recess?
I'm thinking about maybe in September.
Well, I'm sure we can arrange a suitable date. I'm not the keeper of his diary, but now that we've agreed in principle, it's a matter of setting a date.
Thank you for the cooperation on that. I think it is important. He's been in post a year now. With conference recess, before we know it, it'll be end of October. So if we could maybe nail that for the first 2 weeks of September, that would be really appreciated. Can I just finally ask, who is in overall charge of national security policy? Is it Jonathan Powell or is it yourself?
Prime Minister.
And then?
Well, then you have a number of ministers. I have a role in this. Obviously, the Defence Secretary, the Foreign Secretary does. But the Prime Minister is in overall charge of national security policy.
And then it's a whole series of other ministers.
Each of us has specific national security responsibilities, the ones I mentioned. The Home Secretary has security responsibilities too, all in regard to our departmental responsibilities.
I'm sort of struck. I can imagine that he's finally the ultimate accountable person, but I would have imagined that there'd be one individual who would be the person who was responsible, given how busy the Prime Minister was.
Why would you imagine that? The responsibilities for this run across several departments.
Okay, Lord Seville.
Thank you. Thanks, Minister. We're going to continue just on structures for a moment or two. We will come to policy, national security policy in a moment. Just on the National Security Advisor, as I know, obviously, there are parts of the role that Jonathan Powell, as a special advisor, is actually extremely well qualified to fulfil. The advice on policy to the Prime Minister, the maintenance of relationships with foreign national security advisors, etc. He's got great experience in all of that. But there are some structural responsibilities that went with the role when it was a civil servant. Essentially, what one might describe as the Secretary of the National Security Council, or kind of the Cabinet Secretary for National Security, which presumably he can't really exercise. Could you just explain those responsibilities and who is exercising those on essentially yours and the Prime Minister's behalf?
Sure, and I'll ask Matt to say something about this in a minute. Look, first of all, let me say, I think Jonathan Powell is an outstanding appointment as the National Security Advisor. He has not years but decades of experience in this field, both in his time before he joined Number 10 as a diplomat, then in his time as Number 10, and then his post-Number 10 career being engaged in conflict resolution around the world. So I am 100% confident in his abilities, the quality of his advice, and I've seen it in action in the period since he took up the role. I think he's added real value and heft and judgment to the role. You're correct that as a special advisor, there are certain responsibilities he can't, as a special advisor, carried out. They're carried out by Matt Collins, his deputy, on his behalf. Do you want to say a bit more about that?
Yeah, so as you will remember, Lord Sedwall, a number of responsibilities will be carried out by the most senior civil servant. Those have been attributed both to the Cabinet Secretary and to myself. And so I get the joy of attending Cabinet Office Exco on a regular basis to go through the money that we are allocated in order to ensure the good management of the National Security Secretariat.
Yeah, I must admit I delegated that one as a civil servant anyway to one of my deputies at the time. The areas I think we're most interested in, though, there are some which really do require the heft of seniority. And Minister, I echo all you say about Jonathan Powell's credentials for those other elements of the job. Accounting officer for the security and intelligence agencies, chairing the National Security Council officials group of all of the senior permanent secretaries, etc., the Nuclear Deterrent Policy Committee. Can you tell us, is he doing any of those, and who is doing the other elements of that?
Matt does all the things that a special advisor can't do in this. I've seen nothing in my interactions with either Jonathan, the National Security Council, the structure of government decision making, that suggests his status as a special advisor is in any way a problem to the job.
I wasn't suggesting that. I was just asking who is actually the accounting officer for the intelligence agencies now, for example?
To answer that, the Cabinet Secretary.
Okay, thank you.
And just to be clear, the Cabinet Secretary was also the Principal Accounting Officer when Tim Barrow was also the National Security Advisor.
Okay, thank you. And the NSCO?
That is chaired by myself or by Nick Hatsaris, the other deputy.
Okay, thank you. Thank you, Chair.
Thank you. Tan Dacey.
Thank you very much. Minister, let me move on to subsea cables. The National Security Strategy states that, and I quote, "We have to actively prepare for the possibility of the UK homeland coming under direct threat, possibly in a wartime scenario." But when I questioned the Minister for Data Protections and Telecoms recently, and he was seated in that very position, he told me that preparing for a coordinated attack on cables was over-egging this pudding, and that the likes of me and the committee were perhaps focusing on apocalyptic scenarios. Do you agree with that assessment?
Well, I often say if you want to look at our national risk register, if you want some things to keep you awake at night, it's probably a good place to start. I think the issue of subsea cables is important. Obviously, in a technological economy, they're absolutely vital to the way the country works. This is taken seriously in defence planning. The MOD has capabilities in this regard, and I think every country that's reliant on these cables, not just us, should have an eye to any activity which could disrupt them, and we have seen some disruption in recent years. So I think it's a really good example of an area of security, capability, defence thinking that perhaps wouldn't have been in our mind 20 or 30 years ago, but is today. And it shows you that in this field, you have to keep reassessing what are the threats, what those who wish us harm might do. So it should be part of our thinking.
Okay, so I'll take it from that. I think you agree with my estimation. But do you think that we should have contingency plans for a coordinated attack on subsea infrastructure during a period of conflict or not?
I think you can't assume that any, the defence planners can't assume that any attack that would come would necessarily be in an expected way. So I think they have to think through all the options, yes.
Agreed. So I think you'd agree with me that the Minister's comments were not really a good advert for a whole of government security approach, which your national security strategy advocates, and also our Defence Committee's inquiry report into defence in the grey zone advocates.
No, I'm not here to criticise another minister. I'm going to resist your temptation to do that, but I would assure the committee that the issue of subsea cables is on our minds. It's something that comes up in meetings and discussions, and it is very much on the radar screen of national security threats.
Just on that though, do you think that, in the way that you're needing to change the culture and attitude of the country, the nation, that we've got to start with changing the culture in this place and with colleague ministers too?
Well, that's partly why we produce documents like the National Security Strategy, like the SDR, like the Resilience Action Plan that we published last week. All of these documents are testament to the fact that we are reassessing threat, that we are in a changing world, that we have to be agile in the way that we respond to it. That goes for government, hopefully in all the different select committees in the House. The MPs on those, the members of the House of Lords on those are very well briefed, that they too will go through that process, and then I'm sure during the course of the session we will come to the issue of communication with the public, the business community and so on. So I think everybody involved in this, can't proceed on the basis of the same assumptions we would have had some years ago.
The government submission says that the Cabinet Office coordinates cross-cutting policy department or cross-departmental policy development on critical undersea infrastructure. So could you explain exactly what the Cabinet Office has achieved in this respect within the last 6 months?
We have MOD capabilities in this. We are aware of the importance of these undersea cables. There have been some incidents, as you know, with regard to them. We respond to those when we need to have. I think we need repair capability in the country, and it's got to be part of our national security thinking.
Okay. How does what you do differ from DCIT with their subsea infrastructure response group?
Cabinet Office has a coordinating role. It doesn't have programme money. It pulls different departments together when there's a problem. That's a role it's played for quite a long time. That that is the role it plays when there's a crisis, whether it's on this or on anything else. This debate comes up in other contexts about whether the lead department model is the right model to have. There is deep expertise in different departments in different areas. We don't see it as desirable, good value, and probably even the right way to proceed to try to replicate all the deep capability every time at the centre, having two sets of everything. What we do is a coordinating role. If there's a problem where more than one department needs to be involved, that's what the COBRA facilities are for. I spend a lot of my time not just on the national security front, but on other domestic policy areas, chairing meetings, trying to work through problems which affect more than one department. That is sort of Cabinet Office 101. That's what we do.
Right. Minister, you can understand our committee's concerns that there is overlap, but there could also be gaps, and we just want to make sure that in terms of our nation's security that we actually eliminate those potential gaps. And I just also want to clarify another thing, that the DSIP Minister said he was in charge of subsea cable resilience and contingency plans. Is that correct in your estimation?
Yes, as a first port of call it is, but there's always the possibility that we face a crisis where more than one department needs involved, and that is usually where we come in.
Thank you, Chair.
Just picking up the point there, it sounded like you're largely reactive in terms of your approach to this, sort of waiting for things to happen. Do you want to comment to that?
Well, I think we do try and look at scenarios ahead. I was in front of Mr. Byrne's committee the other day, and we were asked if we gamed out various situations. We do, so it's not entirely reactive. Whether we'll have gamed out every single imaginable scenario, probably not. But there are scenarios, whether it's in a foreign policy crisis or a defence crisis, where departments will be brought around the table, and we will try and think through how the government right across the piece would respond.
For what?
So we were assured that the repair of our cable system was in good hands and that we were very good at it in the UK. Our concern would be in a time of conflict that it's because it's in the private sector that many of those private sector wouldn't go to sea, and it would then fall on the state to actually make sure that our cables were protected. Is that something that you've considered and you've got preparations for?
It's not all in the private sector. The MOD has capabilities here. Mark, maybe you want to say a bit more.
So just to pick up a couple of the points. So I wouldn't describe our work as solely responsive. Obviously there has been a number of disruptions across the kind of the North Atlantic and in the North Sea that we have seen from anchor drags, and so we have been working very closely with partners on what we can do. Those partners I would call out as the Finns, the Norwegians, the US, and we've also been doing a consolidated piece of work with NATO, and that really is intended to ensure that we've got the right conversations happening with industry. So both companies who are providing data and also providing energy, different groups of people. The Norwegians in particular are very good at conversations with their energy companies for obvious reasons. So there's a lot of lessons that we've been trying to take there. And then thinking about what military capabilities we can bring to bear, both in peacetime and in wartime. And so CDL quite rightly refers to some of the capabilities that the MOD have with NATO as part of the Operation Baltic Sentry. So all of that is in train. We have regular officials meetings to run the rule over that, But I wouldn't want to give you a false sense of comfort. There is definitely more work for us to do, both to ensure that we've improved the resiliency of subsea cables to those negligent types of incident, and then also to the point that you're making about what do we do in a time of conflict.
Twig.
Thanks, Chair. Minister, as we know, the Prime Minister signed up to NATO's target of 1.5% on security and resilience. Have the government come to a view yet about areas of spending that won't be included in meeting that 1.5% target?
Well, there'll be a lot of areas that wouldn't be included. I don't think we'd include the schools budget in it.
You exclude the skills budget then, yeah.
But obviously, the kind of things you would include would be resilience spend, some cyber security spend, border security, some parts of our energy security, possibly some parts of transport infrastructure, things that go towards the overall strength of the country.
Would you include rural broadband?
It's possible. There's been a lot of talk about broadband and people have been a bit sceptical about this, but if we don't think our communications infrastructure is part of our security setup, our opponents certainly do.
Sorry, just say you think it should be, or
yes.
Yes, rural broadband would be included.
Yes,
then?
it should, because our opponents consider our communications infrastructure as a target, as part of our strength. Why wouldn't we, when we were thinking of defending
What about
it?
policing? Should that be included in the 1.5% target?
I don't think the core police budget would be.
So policing would be excluded then from that target?
I wouldn't include core policing budget in it.
When you say core policing, would you want to elaborate on what you mean by core policing?
We might do some counter-terrorism work.
It could be parts of the police budget.
Which is slightly different from my neighbourhood officer in Bilston High Street.
Yeah.
So
Organised crime, for instance, wouldn't be part of national security, because we know that some people are using those to...
I can see parts of counter-terrorism being considered part of security. There'll be a NATO-agreed definition for all of this, but the point of it is to take a broader view, and indeed the point of view of the national security strategy is to take a broader view of national security than perhaps we might have done in years past, where we considered this very heavily focused on what we'd regard as the traditional core defence budget of the Army, Navy and Air Force.
Or just on infrastructure, let's just say a new runway at Heathrow, would that be included?
Would Heathrow be included? I'm sure Heathrow would be included.
Yeah.
I'm not sure we'd include the third runway at Heathrow, but...
It's not excluded at this point.
Well, there may be... We'd consider the parts of the transport infrastructure that were really core to our national defence.
Obviously this is potentially over 10 years to meet this target. Do you think that might be met quicker, possibly even 27 and 28?
There's a review clause in 2029 to look at the trajectory and the balance between that 3.5% for, if you like, core defence, and this 1.5% for broader security spend. So there is a review clause, and that does, can look at both the timetable and the balance.
Within the spending review, we could by that period, but before 2029, be actually up to the 1.5%.
Before 2029, yes, I think we could.
Yeah. Based on current spending plans.
Well, there'll be another spending review in a couple of years' time, and you can guess that I wouldn't want to preempt that.
Yeah.
When we said we were going to increase defence spending to 2.5%, we were very clear about how that was going to be funded, and we took that responsibility seriously. And we'd do the same as we went through these future increases.
It's just obviously there's some voices of concern about whether actually any of this will be new money. That's actually money that's already planned for in the spending review.
Well, it's a 10-year...
if we hit it by 2029, for instance.
Well, I don't think we'd hit the 5% by 2029. That's not not our target, but we want to be
1.5%.
the way to. Yes, I think we can do that by 2029.
Lord Sedwell?
So just to try and hammer that point, I think everyone on the committee accepts your argument, Minister, that because our opponents might seek to damage areas of our infrastructure, you've mentioned rural broadband, but there are many other areas of our economy which could be vulnerable, and society which could be vulnerable, that those can't all just be levered into the 1.5%, and then essentially leaving, as Mr. Twing's been suggesting, capability where it exists now. So is there anything planned for the 1.5% that is actually going to improve the country's resilience and improve our capability, as opposed to simply defining things as somehow or other within the national security envelope, which could actually go a lot wider than 1.5% of GDP to about a third of government?
Yes, I think so. If you look at the spending review announcement about a month ago, whatever it was very significant increased capital investment in a number of areas in that spending review compared to the plans we inherited at the election last year. In fact, I think the figure the Chancellor put on it was 113 billion over the Parliament increase in capital investment. That won't all, of course, count in this 1.5%, but it does show you that we're not at a standstill when it comes to capital investment. The government has made a decision to increase capital investment in a number of areas. The three biggest across the spending review are probably housing, transport and energy, where there's significant increased capital investment going in. So what I would resist is, if I get the undercurrent of the questioning, is that the 1.5 doesn't require any capital investment. There is capital investment going into areas that may partly account for that.
Okay.
Just on that point, Lord Ricketts said that we really need some sort of boundary around what national security strategy covers, and just listening to the points that were being suggested by Derek Twigg, the 2010 review, which I think he was responsible for, they had 3 tiers of priorities. Is that something you're going to get to?
Well, the people like 3 in a national security strategy, don't they? And the 3 that we have picked is security at home, strength abroad, and sovereign capability. So we have a slightly different 3 15 years on. And I think there's good reasons for that. The hierarchy of priorities in the 2010 review was, I think, partly a result of the spending atmosphere at the time, where we were entering an era where there had to be spending reductions. Now, priorities are always a challenge for government, but when I think back to 2010, that idea of cutting spending and really taking things out was very dominant in the government's thinking at the time. I think we are in, I'm not saying spending discipline doesn't matter, it clearly does, but I think the exam question in this national security strategy is a bit different. It's based on a more fluid geopolitical situation. It's based on a response to events, particularly over the past few years. And I think critically, it is based on an idea of asking ourselves what we can do in terms of our own deep strengths and capabilities in a way that's a bit different from the 2010 review.
I guess the concern is that it seems as though it could apply to so many different areas, this 1.5%. And therefore, if NATO hasn't yet defined what could and should be included in that 1.5%, is that something the UK government should be taking a lead on?
Well, we're very keen to work with our NATO partners on this. And the review in 2029 will look exactly at the balance between the two things. There is a NATO definition on the core defence spending, and we'll work with NATO partners. This newer concept of 1.5 and 3.5. We'll work with NATO partners on both parts of that.
Well, Tunnicliffe.
Forgive me getting into the detail. Let's suppose that the military people say the present road infrastructure is not up to moving tanks about, or parts of it are not. And you come along to build or replace a road. You have one figure to replace a road which is good enough for everyday traffic, and you have another figure to replace the road so that it'll take tanks. What comes out of the 1.5%? The total cost of the road or the increment to allow it to take tanks?
Well, suppose it would be, I suppose it would be the differential spend. I think different countries will take a view on this. We'll have to come to a proper NATO-agreed definition.
So that is something we could take a lead on.
Sure, we could. We're always keen to take a lead in NATO.
Well, Safras.
Thank you, Chair. As we're aware, a whole lot of critical national infrastructure is in the hands of the private sector. And so what are your priorities for boosting private sector resilience, and what can be done to incentivize the private sector to invest in these things?
It's a really important question. I think a number of your witnesses have said we have public risk in private hands, or a phrase to that effect. And that is a feature of our economy. I think it's really important that there's a proper dialogue between government and the owners of critical national infrastructure, much of which is in the private sector, about resilience and the importance of the services they provide, having continuity. I've taken part in discussions like that with the intelligence services and owners of CNI. My impression is they do take this seriously. I think it's been on the agenda of boards probably much more in the last 10 years than in a previous time. We've seen recent cyber attacks on some very important household names which have really highlighted this, and it shows you the damage that can be done. In fact, we've seen attacks not only on Marks and Spencer's and the Co-op, but also the government's legal aid system. So the risk runs across the public and private sectors, and it's really important that we have a proper dialogue, particularly with those parts of the business infrastructure that the public really rely on. And you know what the key sectors are, from banking, energy, and so on.
And do you feel they're incentivized enough to make these investments?
I don't think you could ever say every risk is covered. But I think if you look at the experience of what's happened in the last couple of months, boards will be very conscious of the danger of this, seeing what it's done to a couple of great British companies and household names in recent months.
Thank you. Just specifically on the 10-year infrastructure strategy, that suggests the Cabinet Office won't finish mapping the existing CNI standards before the end of 2026. And for the standards on digital and telecoms, energy, transport and water sectors, that's not expected until 2030. Isn't that a bit too far out? Won't threats change and evolve by then?
Threats are always changing. It's a 10-year strategy. I work very closely with the Treasury on this. We have a infrastructure subcommittee of the Home and Economic Affairs Committee that takes these projects, tries to drive them forward, tries to identify the bottlenecks, and it's really important that's an active process in government, because in the UK I think there's broad agreement that it takes too long to get things built. We've got a big planning and infrastructure bill going through Parliament to try and speed that up, but it's not just a matter of the law, it's a matter of the decision-making processes in government, and it's important that we push these projects forward as quickly as we can.
Thank you. And just finally from me, the Strategic Defence Review references a new deal on CNI with the private sector. Though we haven't seen any reference to this in the National Security Strategy or the Resilience Action Plan. Could you talk a bit about what that new deal might look like?
Well, I think it's what we've been talking about, that it's really important for boards, for private companies, to take the resilience, the cyber security really seriously. And I don't say that by way of preaching, because I think it's important for government to do it in its own house too. And the truth is, this is not perfect. We have a lot of old legacy systems. They are carrying risk. This is a constant challenge. So I think it's a challenge for all of us. And I said this in a speech to Cyber UK conference a couple of months ago. What happened recently with the retailers should be a wake-up call for everybody, including government organisations, about the risks and dangers of cyber attacks.
Thank you, Chair.
Just to pick up on that point, CDL, so the two retailers, the two principal retailers that were struck by this, obviously well-known names, but if that had been, say, two of the largest of the top three supermarket chains, and it had actually been more successful, what do you think the result of that would have been?
Well, you saw the disruption to M&S's operations in particular. I think, who can say exactly, but I think it's shown you what the level of disruption can be.
To consumers, what would your fear be for consumers and their behaviour?
I fear for consumers and their behaviour.
They can't get their food from supermarkets.
Well, I think the supermarkets have got very robust food distribution systems. I don't want to alarm the public here, but I would say those attacks did show the importance of strong cyber security, as I keep saying, in both public and private sectors, because I don't want to sit here as a minister and say this is just a matter for the private sector. It's obviously not. It's a matter for all of us.
Going back to your first point, though, about there is a dialogue happening between government and private sector. Is it not time that we need something more urgent and more definite about how we start planning for these sort of risks? And actually, going back to my earlier point about the whole of society approach, really a wake-up call to business to say, look what's happened. And if you heard the evidence from Marks and Spencer's and Co-op and so on, just what really could have happened and what that meant and what they are now thinking to do, that needs to be heard by all, doesn't it?
I think communications on this front probably will need to step up in the future, not just because of those attacks, wake-up call as they are, but if we are seeing this as a dimension of our national security in a way that perhaps wasn't the case in the past, then talking to the public about it is important. We published this Resilience Action Plan last week. Part of that is to, for example, exercise the emergency alert system on a nationwide basis in September. We're trying to draw attention to the advice on government websites about sensible precautions the public can have at home. I think we have to make this more normal in this country in a way that it is already in some other countries.
Mike Martin.
Thank you, Chair. Thank you very much for your time today. The National Security Strategy is a very interesting document. Mr McFadden, could you describe the role of the National Security Council in delivering that strategy, please?
Yes, they will. That's the principal cross-government forum which will drive all this through. That is the place, to go back to Tandesi's question, that's the kind of forum that brings together all the different departments in government that have security responsibilities. So it will play an important role in driving all this forward.
Thank you. How many times do you think the National Security Council was mentioned in the National Security Strategy?
I haven't counted.
Want to have a guess?
Oh.
0. We have a mention of the UN Security Council. We have a mention of the Gulf Cooperation Council and a new soft power council, but we don't have a mention of the National Security Council. So you've just said it's going to play a very important role, but how would you reconcile those differences?
I don't think it makes any difference to the National Security Council's role, how many times it's mentioned. It remains there as an important part of government before and after the strategy.
So you can confirm that with the new government coming in last year, that the NSC hasn't been sidelined in any way, that its role remains exactly the same as under previous governments?
I think the role's always exactly the same, because different governments will have a different rhythm of meetings, but I certainly don't believe it's been sidelined, not at the meetings I've been at.
What would be the differences then between this government and the previous government?
You could have a difference in the rhythm of meetings depending on who the government is or who the Prime Minister is, for example. I don't know exactly what the rhythm of meetings was under previous regimes, but it's an important body and it plays an important role.
Okay, so just to confirm, you're saying there's no substantive changes?
I wasn't a minister in the last government, so it's difficult for me to compare. It's easier for me to tell you what's been happening in the last 12 months.
Okay, and so the role of the National Security Advisor, which we've discussed a little bit earlier, how does the role of the National Security Advisor dock into the National Security Council? What's his role on the National Security Council?
Well, he attends the National Security Council, of course, but his role's much bigger than that. His role is as a permanent, everyday advisor to the...
Specifically, what's his role on the National Security Council?
He
within
attends
that
the
structure?
National Security Council. He can speak at the National Security Council. But his role is much broader, as I was about to say. He's an everyday, constant, extremely high-quality advisor on national security to the Prime Minister, and a very important interlocutor with other national security advisors around the world, which is a big part of his job.
I can see that he's extremely credentialed and skilled at this job. I'm just trying to tease apart the structures that we have. So, you could argue that two of the aspects of the role are the diplomatic, the emissary one that you've just described, where you're advising the Prime Minister, you're acting as a Prime Minister's representative and Sherpa with particularly difficult problems and interfacing with other countries' national security advisors. The other one is that role on the Security Council when a decision has been made to make sure that the coordination happens across government departments and that decision is driven through the system, which we all have experience of Whitehall. You need to drive decisions through the system to make sure they happen. Is that the role of Jonathan Powell?
Not solely, no. There's a whole government apparatus to do that.
But who's the point person? If a decision is made on the National Security Council, who drives that decision through and makes it happen?
Let me give you an example. If the decision was made on the National Security Council for the MOD to do something, I'd expect the Secretary of State for Defence to make sure that was carried out.
Sure. And what if it's a decision that involves 4 government departments?
Then there's a government apparatus, he's got the Deputy National Security Advisors, there's the Cabinet Office itself. We do have ways of communicating with government departments.
So, okay, yeah, no, sure. And then, so are you saying that it's not the role of the National Security Advisor to drive those decisions through when they touch on multiple government departments?
No, I think his role is to give extremely high quality advice. As a point of action, there are many ways in government to get that done. I'm not quite sure what you're driving at.
Okay. Should we take a different question? So there's a number of reviews that have been arted since last July. The China audit, this is one of them. The Strategic Defence Review is another one. many of these are reporting now. Who's responsible for ensuring that these are coherent with each other and the recommendations are in line with each other?
I think the National Security Strategy itself has done a lot of that. We were conscious there was a number of reviews and strategies. We had the SDR. We had a number of others that you mentioned. The National Security Strategy brought a lot of that together, tried to give a very broad view right across those three elements of security at home, alliances abroad, and sovereign capability. And I think it was good to have a document that put a lot of it together.
And then finally, previously, in fact, introduced by Lord Sedwell, was the idea of fusion doctrine, which was getting those government departments to work together to give a consolidated response to issues. How much of that fusion doctrine would you say has survived the changeover of government? Does it underline the way that government acts now?
Look, I think getting government's departments to work together is a constant Whitehall challenge. And is a very good thing to do. The system, the way it's set up with departmental budgets, we know the dynamics that can give rise to, and so it's really important to have something that sits across departments like the National Security Strategy, which involves any number of departments from education through our university capabilities, business and trade and so on, so that ministers across the piece are conscious of the changing geopolitical environment, conscious of the need for agility in this space, and as and when a decision takes place, that the right group of ministers are brought together to do that.
So just 2 points on some of your questions. So one, we have a machine within the centre of government called the National Security Secretariat, which is responsible for driving delivery of decisions taken by NSC. Obviously, CDL is completely correct. An individual Secretary of State will be delivering on those, but when they're across different departments, we will be following up on that.
Who leads the Secretariat? Sorry, just really quickly, who leads the Secretariat?
So I lead the Secretariat from an executive perspective, and then Jonathan sits on top of that and provides advice to the Prime Minister and the National Security Council. In terms of fusion doctrine, so actually Lord Sedwell recruited me into the NSS many moons ago. And whilst the fusion doctrine doesn't live in the same way, the intent does. And so the ability to bring different departments together around common objectives and driving forward that delivery as outlined in the National Security Strategy is core to our remit.
So thank you very much, Ms. Collins. That's really helpful of you to interject. So I guess if it's the National Security Secretariat that is responsible for driving decisions cross-government, cross-departments, and you lead that National Security Secretariat, is it you that's responsible for driving cross-departmental decisions?
Mr. Collins?
Yeah.
The Prime Minister is responsible for the National Security Council. So we provide advice and updates on delivery.
Thank you.
Yeah, can I just go back a moment to what you were saying, just to illustrate this issue with an example. So, say there was a problem with the NHS IT systems, and there'd been a cyber attack on. Would it be the fault of the Secretary of State for Health that there'd been a failure of the NHS IT systems because it had a cyber attack, and who would hold him or her to account? Would it be you?
Be the fault of the cyber attacker. It wouldn't be the fault of the Secretary of State for Health. But let me pursue the example. There have been examples of cyber attacks on parts of the NHS or suppliers. Some of them can be very damaging to patient care. It would partly depend on the scale. If it's something that just affected one trust, it would probably be dealt with in the Department of Health. If it was a broader system-wide thing, then it might be brought into more of a cross-government structure. It would probably depend on the scale of the attack.
Okay, thank you. Actually, before I come to Lord Boateng, just on the China audit, we want to talk about China in just a moment, but when the NSS was published, we talked in the Chamber about the China audit, and I think there are 3 pages devoted to it in the NSS.
3 paragraphs.
3 paragraphs, rather. It would be greatly beneficial for this committee. You can see around the table the calibre of individuals that we have as members of this committee, for us to have access to the China audit, given its importance. Is that something you'd be prepared to share with us privately?
The China audit doesn't sit as a document. The Foreign Secretary made a statement to the House of Commons on it, I think on the same day that I made the statement on the national security strategy a couple of weeks ago. And he's been clear, this idea of audit is an ongoing process. It isn't a snapshot at a given time, but I'm very sure the Foreign Secretary would be, or the Foreign Office, would be very happy to discuss in some way with the committee their thinking on the China audit and the different dimensions that he laid out in the House of Commons statement.
Okay. Thank you. Lord Boateng.
Thank you very much, Chairman. Mr. McFadden, thank you for all you do. In your role as Chancellor of the Duchy of Lancaster, you are unique. You sit at the heart of government, and you're uniquely well placed to look across the different government departments. And I'm very glad to have heard you say earlier on that you work closely with the Treasury on these matters. Because we as a committee are obviously concerned to ensure that the decisions that are made about spending impact positively on our national security. And I wonder if you could address the issue of the downstream consequences for the UK of events in India, Kashmir, China border, events in sub-Saharan Africa, in the Middle East, so far as the security of these islands are concerned. Certainly sub-Saharan Africa, stuff that happens there has implications for biosecurity. We know that. As does stuff that happens in China have implications for biosecurity. Similarly, events in the Sahel impact directly on the coast of Kent, and events in Kashmir, India, impact directly on the streets of our major cities. And we know that in order to fund our, in my view, correctly fund at the right level, moving to 3 to 5% of our budget on defence, we've had to make cuts in overseas development. So how are you ensuring that those cuts don't actually impact adversely on security in the Sahel because we are no longer prioritising livelihoods as we used to do? How do you make sure that our biosecurity is protected if we're no longer spending the same levels of money that we were spending on centres for disease control in Africa or elsewhere? How are you establishing your priorities in that regard?
Well, you have deeper Treasury experience than I do in terms of your time there as a minister, but it's a really good question. And the honest answer is the Treasury and government in general, it is ultimately about choices, and it would be nice to say yes to everything, but we don't live in a world where we can say yes to everything. And so the decision to invest in hard power was a necessary one, but we had to make some choices to do it. And so, in some of the things you mentioned, of course, there is a balance between hard power and soft power. But we had to make that decision to increase the core defence spending to 2.5% of GDP. Where we're not able to do things with the overseas development budget, the minister responsible tries to make those decisions in the best way possible. It is still a substantial amount of money that we spend on overseas development. And on biosecurity, we've actually, in the spending review, put aside significant amounts on biosecurity. For example, for the proper lab infrastructure that we have in the UK, the Secretary of State for DEFRA announced a major investment in Weybridge a couple of weeks ago. There'll be more to come on biosecurity investment in the coming months, but we understand that is an important dimension of all this, and I'm grateful to the Chancellor and the Treasury for the amount that they set aside for that.
Well, you see, we are told that the Integrated Security Fund has a budget of almost £1 billion. So how do you and the National Security Advisor impact on that spending? Or do you just leave it to the Treasury and the departments to fight it out amongst themselves?
Oh, there are various claims on it. Sometimes it's upstream work on various risks to the UK. The other Deputy National Security Advisor, Nick Katsaras, advises on that fund too. There are a lot of calls.
What about you personally? Do you impact yourself on the decisions and say to the relevant Secretary of State, well, hold on a minute, I've got oversight of the national security strategy, and if you don't make that decision, it's going to have implications downstream?
Well, I like to think it's a more cooperative process than that.
Sure. And you're very good at cooperation, Mr. McFadden. We know that. But how actually are you influencing events? I mean, that's the question. That
the fund is there, and it has to be allocated to various purposes. Often those go through other departments, and we discuss that with the relevant departments and make the decisions. That's how it's done.
Let me ask you then a specific. Are there any reductions to counter-extremism and smuggling programs in the Middle East as a result of the spending decisions that have been made in terms of the core focus on Euro-Atlantic security?
Look, the fund is not going to be as large in future years as it has been in the past. So we will have to look at some things. If you've got a specific, I'll come back to you on it.
So, yeah, I do have one specific in terms of addressing the issue of conflict resolution and peace building, because you will know that, for instance, Common Ground have made the point that more and more we are using our priorities and our funding is using money to deal with the symptoms of conflict rather than actually dealing, and maybe Mr. Collins has some specifics on this, rather than dealing with the hard, gritty work that we know has to be done in order to prevent conflict breaking out in the first place. And that has been done, in my experience, quite apart from my Treasury experience, as a former head of mission. I know a lot of that goes on the ground in Africa, in the Middle East, in Asia. Mr. Collins?
Sure.
If you've got any specifics.
So, as CDL says, we're working through exactly how the funding will be spent in the future following the spending round decisions, making sure that we've got a good assessment and understanding of the full breadth of risk. And you've mentioned that one, and I completely agree with you. Generally, spending more on a cure is better than preventing it in the first place, but we're having to make some difficult decisions that will be informed by robust analysis from all parts of our national security system.
And you will be using your powers of persuasion, Mr. McFadden, to make sure that Secretaries of State and Ministers do in fact have national security in the widest sense at the forefront of their mind, both upstream and downstream, when they're making these decisions.
I don't have to use my powers of persuasion. I think this is quite well understood among ministers, but it doesn't mean they can say yes to every demand.
No, of course not.
They're all, of course, having to work within the allocated budgets, and there's not a Secretary of State who would not like to have more. But it's not a matter of persuading a given Secretary of State that these issues are important. I think that's broadly understood.
I'm sure it's understood, but where will we as a committee be able to see evidence that decisions have been made about priorities, that have made the hard choices that you rightly say, Mr. McFadden, will have to be made? Is there some sort of central process by which this is done? Is there any document produced?
Well, they'll be reflected in the decisions of that security fund and how it's allocated. But you have to be candid with the committee. There isn't going to be as much in it in the future as there has been in the past.
I want to move us on now.
Thank you very much.
Baroness Full.
Dame Emily was going to kick off.
Dame Emily.
Okay. So can I start with what you told the Business and Trade Subcommittee last week? I want to talk about China. That the biggest threat to economic stability in 2025 is the increase in operations by state actors. Does China still pose the greatest state-based threat to the UK's economic security?
I'm not sure it's necessarily China or Russia, but state actors and those, sometimes state actors expresses itself in criminal groups who can be linked to states. They won't necessarily be directly on behalf of states, but they can act on behalf of states. So we are conscious in that change in the threat picture, and sometimes it's linked to organised crime.
So some of us have been trying to find trying to get an idea about the China audit, and have been referred to a number of documents, and obviously one of them is the National Security Strategy, which there were 3 paragraphs on China, and there was a line in it: instances of China's espionage. So 3.1. Instances of China's espionage, interference in our democracy, the undermining of our economic security have increased in recent years. It's quite an alarming statement, and I wondered whether you agree with that and whether it was right for people to be alarmed by that.
Well, if it's in the National Security Strategy, of course I agree with it. Is it right for people to be alarmed? It's right for people to be alert and concerned. I'm not here to alarm people, but I think people should be concerned about the security of our systems, and those who would probe that security, whether it's just for the purposes of data collection or whether it's for something more active and more harmful. I think alert and concerned, and on our own side of the fence, trying to secure those systems and make sure they're as robust as possible should be part of what we do. But as I've said earlier in the session, this is a constant effort.
I understand that, but I mean specifically, it's the National Security Strategy points out that China is responsible for espionage, interfering in our democracy, and undermining our economic security. It's difficult, therefore, to work out how we protect ourselves against those 3 things, as well as going for growth.
Well, this is the challenge of China, isn't it? Where we have to be robust in protecting ourselves against those things, but also recognise that disengagement from the second biggest economy in the world is not ultimately in our national interest. So there are areas of growth, areas of investment where there would be no security risk at all. And we should pursue those. But at the same time, we have to have a protect function, which is in the areas that you're referring to, and probably several more.
And that's why the China audit is so important, and presumably it's not just an audit, there's a strategy coming from the China audit as well.
The two aspects that we're talking about were very much reflected in the Foreign Secretary's statement that he made to the House of Commons a few weeks ago. And he talked about the kind of things that you've mentioned, but he also talked about the economic opportunities of engaging with China, and the government's strategy on this is to promote its national interest, to promote our economic interests, but also to protect our security in every dimension that we need to.
I had the advantage of hearing the Foreign Secretary and, of course, yourself in Parliament, and having had the Foreign Secretary before the Foreign Affairs Select Committee. And I think our concern is that the audit is largely secret and the strategy is largely secret. And in those circumstances, the problem that we have, I think, is how are people on a day-to-day basis to engage with China, wanting to grow our economy whilst also protecting ourselves against espionage, interference in our democracy, and the undermining of our economic security?
Well, there's two main dimensions to this that I'm not the only politician to have mentioned. One is the protection dimension, and the other one is the promotion dimension that I said. We also, of course, have the legal structure of the National Security and Investment Act, which considers the security dimension of investments in 17 named areas. And there's an annual report on that, and the operation of the Act is quite a new system. It's been in operation only for 3 or 4 years. We discussed that a bit at the Business and Trade Committee last week. And as we operate that system, I think we're both getting better at operating it, but I also think the way that it operates in terms of the business community and the investment community is becoming better known.
One of the things that the Foreign Office, the Foreign Secretary told us about was about the new China Guidance Hub, which I think is going to be run by the Foreign Office. Is that correct?
That's what he said.
And so, I mean, I wondered, therefore, if let's say I was in local government and it looked like China wanted to invest in my area, would I just go to the website, or would there be assistance that I might get elsewhere? Or if I was in a university and one of my postgraduate students was being hit with a slaps order because their work was something that at the very least irritated the Chinese, where would they go for advice and guidance? Would they go to the Foreign Office, or is there somewhere else?
Let me take the local authority example. Okay. Under the new Procurement Act, there's a national security procurement advice function which will exist in the Cabinet Office precisely for that function. If there's a local authority that's contracting, it's got potential investment, wants advice, the central procurement function sits in the Cabinet Office.
So what do? I ring up the Cabinet Office and they'll help me, will they?
Yeah, you can ring or email or contact us in a number of ways.
Just because the strategy is not public, and because the audit's not public, it's not clear, you know, how we're going to work together, and what in relation to the universities.
Tell me the example again.
I don't know. There's a postgraduate who's taken a course that looks like they might get access to data or to particular technical research, and it might compromise national security. Or there's a postgrad who's doing a dissertation or whatever it is that they do, and is not allowed to publish it because they're being threatened with a slaps order.
There's a dedicated team that sits between the Department for Education and the Department for Science, Innovation and Technology, which is there and regularly speaks to universities to provide them with advice on exactly that.
And will they be experts in China as well as experts in in tech and in data.
They'll be able to draw on a full range of kind of knowledge and expertise that we have right across, our academic sector, our technology sector, but also into our national security community as well.
And of the 1,000 Mandarins who are going to be speaking Mandarin, how many of them are going to be experts in data and technology that might be able to give advice when it comes to investment or particular individuals being placed in positions that might compromise our security?
So I don't know the exact number and the distribution across different areas of expertise, but I think the point is to make sure that you've got access to different experts in different areas. And kind of going back to some of the points that were being made on the fusion doctrine, this can't be done by one bit of government alone. We need to be making sure that we've got the right conversations between different experts and also the right conversations with different sectors outside of Whitehall.
Do you appreciate the need for expertise where you get one person who has a proper understanding of some of these areas that the Chinese are interested in, whilst also having language?
So I think it's important to have both things and make sure that if you can find one person that is an expert in everything, I think we'll be very, very lucky. So as a CDL mentioned before, the benefit of the Cabinet Office is that you can bring those experts together who have bits of the answer but then can facilitate a conversation so you've got a better holistic view.
Thank you very much. Just a few points to add, and mindful of time, Chair. So you've articulated a balance between sort of economic prosperity, sort of sovereignty issues, which we actually haven't addressed today, human rights again, and also security. Who would you say leads on that overall articulation? Is it the Foreign Secretary? Is it the NSC? Is it you?
On the relationship with China?
Well, on calling it out, which is in a way going to take precedent? Is it the prosperity? Is it the national security issue? Is it concerns about whatever sovereignty issue or human rights issue that rises?
Well, we talk about economic security. Both words are important. In terms of the direct relationships with China, probably the Foreign Secretary is the key figure, but other ministers will have a relationship too. For example, the Chancellor visited China for an economic and financial dialogue. The Energy Secretary has visited China, so it doesn't solely lie with the Foreign Office, but obviously, like any other relationship around the world, the Foreign Secretary is in pole position.
Okay, and then ultimately the National Security Council with the Prime Minister?
Well, obviously, ultimately the Prime Minister, but on the various dimensions that you've mentioned, I go back to the National Security and Investment Act a little bit. Where this comes together is quite often considering investments under that Act, and to give the committee a bit of a flavour of how that works, if there's a proposed investment, the unit who does that will take advice from across Whitehall, and so the MOD might have a view, the Department for Energy might have a view, the Foreign Office itself might have a view, and it will come together in advice to me as the decision maker on the investments that are covered by that Act. Where there's a different kind of visit and a dialogue between the Foreign Secretary and his opposite numbers, he will of course be considering our economic interests, our security interests, and the human rights issues that you mentioned.
And has that been a matter of discussion as to whether or not you put China on the Foreign Influence Registration Scheme known as FIRS? Is that still a live issue?
The legislation is there. We've made certain announcements on countries that will be on the top tier of registration under that Act. We haven't made that decision with China.
Are you expecting to make that decision in the next few months?
Not necessarily. We'll always keep this under review, but I can't give you an indication of an announcement in that regard.
One more question, if I may. When we signed the tariff deal with the Americans quite recently, there was a clause in that agreement which was specifying about sort of supply chains from China pharmaceutical, and some other industries. So are the Americans partly in charge of our China policy?
No, I wouldn't say that, but you've seen the US administration. They have strong views on these things. I think the agreement we signed is very much in the national interest. I'm a West Midlands MP, and I can tell you it was very much in the West Midlands interest because it saved thousands of jobs in automotive and was a very important agreement to sign.
Will you be checking with our American allies when you're looking at inward investment points?
Look, we consider all aspects of our security relationship when we're considering inward investment, and we've got a very good, I think, though still young, regime of our own, which is something quite common. The Americans also have their similar system. Japan has a system. A number of countries have a system like this.
Lord Seville.
Thank you, Chair. Just briefly, can I connect this issue with the previous issue raised by Lord Boateng? We've cut our aid budget. The Americans have radically reduced theirs. You go all over Africa, all over Latin America, the Chinese are everywhere with investments and are increasing the dependence of those countries on their economic relationship with China, including countries that we're going to depend on for natural resources, etc. How worried should we be about that?
We've still got a substantial aid budget. It's not as big as it's been in, or it won't be as big as it's been in future years. And I'm not denying the decision we made in any way, shape or form. But I don't think we could get to the point where we are saying we don't appreciate the importance of soft power or this area. It's still a substantial budget, and it's up to us in making the decision that we made on defence and overseas development to make sure that budget is used in the best way possible, and that's what we'll try and do.
I wasn't just asking about the aid budget, I was asking more generally about China extending their influence into areas that really affect our economic security.
Of course they will, and look, we are a country which prides itself rightly, I think, on having big diplomatic reach around the world. We don't have the biggest armed forces in the world, but we use everything we can, our cultural power, our soft power, our diplomatic presence, Britain's reputation in the world to maximise our influence. That's part of our foreign policy, that's part of our policy of national interest around the world, and we will keep it.
Thank you, the Chair. Lord Sedwell mentioned minerals there in passing in his question. I'm interested in the point of where we get our minerals from, because we can't supply everything domestically. The EU is looking at agreements with Africa as a way forward to reduce reliance on China. Are we looking at something similar?
Get our minerals from where we can get them. And there's around the world there's technology changes, of course there's competition for access to these minerals, and I think it's a good question because it focuses our minds on the need to have regard to supply chains. You know, we learned that during COVID, we learned it during the post-COVID period where we had quite a spike in inflation, and I think quite a lot has been learned about supply chains and the need for security and robustness in them in recent years.
Yeah, I touched on the balance between what we can do domestically and what we can do through supply chains, but to that point more widely, the National Security Strategy talks about a baseline level of sovereign capability set against what we can secure from our allies. What do you see as that balance being, and what changes from what we needed from where we are at the moment?
Well, let me give you a couple of examples. The decision we made on steel making was an example of a government intervention to try to secure a capability, and we met on that Saturday a few months ago and passed the relevant legislation. If you think of the technological field, the government's made a decision with regard to compute power, with the announcement about investment in the Edinburgh supercomputer. And so I think across the piece, you are seeing decisions being taken with a recognition that the country's capacity is part of its national security. And that's maybe a change what those decisions might have been some years ago, and I think it's a product of the recent experience that we do that, and it's reflected in the national security strategy itself.
Yeah, thank you. And both the industrial strategy and the national security strategy reference AI and technology more widely and published within a day of each other. How are we going to get that balance right with such challenging areas?
Look, we've taken the position on AI very seriously with the AI opportunities, the action plan. We had a presentation on this at Cabinet just on Friday from the Secretary of State, from Matt Clifford. The Prime Minister is very strongly behind us making the most of the AI opportunities, while of course caring about security and safety dimensions too. This country has got a great tradition of creativity and ingenuity. We haven't always in the past been as good as we can at exploiting that creativity and ingenuity. This is a new field, and it is very high priority both for the Prime Minister and for the government as a whole to try to make the most of a very, very fast developing field of technology. That's why it was a Cabinet presentation the other day and why we've taken the actions we've done in the last 6 months or so.
Yeah, thank you. And do you see some of the IP that's being developed in this space being retained in this country with ownership in this country? It's been a challenge for a long time in the UK to retain startups and scale-ups and to retain ownership here. Do you see that as part of what is desirable for us?
It has been a challenge in the past to do that, but I don't. And while we care about AI sovereign capability, compute power and so on, this won't all be done within the UK. And there was a question a few moments ago about the trade agreement we struck with America. I think it's important to view that agreement not as an end, but potentially as a platform. I think there is capacity for greater cooperation between the UK and the United States in the technological field in the future too.
Can I bring in Baroness Kidron? I'm sorry, we're going to run out of time.
Thank you very much, Chair. Minister, you'll be aware that there's been quite a lot of criticism about the AI Opportunities Plan, exactly on the point that you have just expressed, that there's not enough concentration on UK sovereignty and UK headquartered companies. And I just wonder what you've got to say on that issue to those who are so concerned about that.
We want the UK to be a good home for AI investment. Part of that opportunities plan is to have AI growth zones in the country to be an active home for investment. So we do want to have the maximum capability here in the UK. But I think we also understand the power of Silicon Valley. The global investment in this from some of the huge tech companies is absolutely enormous. And so we develop our plan in recognition of that. And I think that the trade agreement that we reached with the United States is a potential opportunity for greater cooperation in this field in the future. I don't think we should see that as a danger. I think we should see it as an opportunity.
And in particular, we are a nation with very rich data sets. And is there going to be some, this is a sector that is well known for extracting value. They've done it very successfully over a number of decades now. How are we going to protect the UK's sovereign data sets as part of our sovereign capability rather than just let them disappear offshore?
Well, I think a judgment on the use of data or the potential use of data should always be in the national interest. especially if it's public data. But I wouldn't have as a starting point an aversion to one particular country over this. I don't think that's the way to go. I think for example, in health, the use of data to get more accurate treatments based on individual health characteristics could be hugely beneficial in the future. And I think any decision taken about that should be what's in the best interest of the patient, what's in the best interest of the British public.
I think those two things could be in conflict sometimes. May I just finally ask you just a question about the news? The strategy does mention the need for accurate information, and I'm just interested to see whether the government is thinking about how to protect the news, how to protect the efficacy and accuracy of the news, as we see a great many summaries coming, as the first port of call, and whether actually, this might start being a question for Ofcom, for government, for regulation to make sure that UK has access to news.
I think at this time in the proceedings, this is a really interesting but very big subject to introduce, and it's so important. I've got teenage children. I don't think they've ever picked up a physical newspaper, and I'm not sure they ever will. And so the way that my generation consumes news compared to them is completely different. Look, we've got some assets. We're very lucky to have the BBC. I think the BBC's standards of news judgment may have had a couple of rocky episodes recently, but its standards of news judgment and impartiality and correct reporting are an enormous British asset, which I think influences the rest of media too, but it's a very fast changing world. We are, of course, concerned to keep a reliable supply of information to people. We have got a Defending Democracy task force which considers the importance of the robustness of our elections, the protection of politicians to say their piece, to go about their business free of intimidation. There are lots of aspects of this which are really, really important in an open democracy like ours. So I very much agree with you about the importance of this. I think we've got some really good assets, but I think we've also got to recognise we're in a very fast changing world where people's news sources in the future are going to be very different from what they were in the past.
That takes us very neatly into the final area we'd like to explore. Liam Byrne.
Thanks, Chair. I just want to pick up on the Defending Democracy Task Force and its important work ahead. I understand from those who know about these things that Russian intelligence services have now concluded that the way to route money into the UK political system is through Western proxies using cryptocurrency, which is obviously very difficult to track. Shouldn't we be banning cryptocurrency as a means of donating to political parties in this country?
I think it's a very good question. And I definitely think it's something that the Electoral Commission should be considering. And I think when we have the funding of democracy is often a controversial area, but I think it's very important that we know who's providing the donation, are they properly registered, what are the bona fides of that donation. I think it's a very important question you've asked.
Okay, well, if I take Christopher Harborne, who received $70 million in Tether tokens in early 2019, shortly before he routed somewhere between 10 and 13 million pounds into UK political sources, it's currently very difficult for the Electoral Commission to see into the ultimate origin of that money. Shouldn't we be therefore introducing an obligation on UK political parties to know your donor and, crucially, know where your donor's cash comes from?
Well, they should know your donor, but I think the challenge that you put is a very good one. And I always think that the legislation should keep up with the technology and practices of the time. So if you're asking me, should the legislation consider whether the current systems are fit for purpose. I think that's a very good challenge.
We obviously don't know whether that money derived from profits in the UK. Mr Harborne is, of course, Thai-based, although he's a major shareholder in Kinetic. Do you think that only UK-derived profits should be the fountainhead for donations into UK politics?
I'm reluctant to comment on an individual, as you'd expect.
I could give you many different cases.
I'm sure you could. Let me take your question as a more general one, if I may, about should we be sure where money is coming from? Yes, we should. Should political parties be able to make sure of that? And should the public authorities be able to make sure of that? Yes, we should. And if the legislation hasn't kept up with innovation in finance, should that also be considered? My view is yes, it should.
Okay. Well, let's look at the way the money comes in particular the perils of unlimited companies, which, as you know, don't file company accounts, so it's very difficult to track exactly what kinds of transactions. I don't want you to comment on the case, but I'll give you a real case. George Cottrell, son of Reform's second largest donor, funded Mr Farage's private jet in 2016. According to media reports, is now being investigated by authorities in Montenegro for running an illegal cryptomat to fund Europe Now. Recently opened a UK unlimited private company, which of course doesn't have the need to file to accounts. Now I'm sure his behaviour is impeccable, but if, God help us, it wasn't, actually it would be quite difficult for somebody operating a financial system like that it would be very easy for them to hide ultimately who they were paying what and where the money came from. Is unlimited companies therefore a loophole from which we shouldn't really allow money to flow into UK politics?
Well, look, I don't personally govern the legislation on this, but I think these points you're making are well made, and I think we should always keep our legislation up to date to ensure that the finance and the politics can be trusted by the public, and if from time to time the legislation needs to be changed to make sure that's the case, then of course that's something that should be considered.
Okay, finally, Chair, on enforcement, the National Crime Agency has been dimmed by not with purpose when it comes to investigating some of this. There's an unhappy mix of responsibilities between the Electoral Commission and the National Crime Agency. Certainly it didn't do a great job at finding the ultimate source of the £8 million that Aaron Banks routed into UK politics, even once it had been flagged by the Electoral Commission as of suspect origin. Do you think that either the Electoral Commission or the NCA are going to need their enforcement capabilities beefed up, given the new threats to the integrity of our democracy that we now confront?
Well, again, I'm resisting the temptation to comment on any particular donation or individual, but again, I think the case you make is something that should be considered. We should always be looking at whether the authorities in these fields have got the powers that they need to ensure that funding comes from donors that are properly registered, and that the source of the funding itself belongs to them. But that's again, not making a comment on any individual donation.
Thank you, Chair.
Thank you. Just a final couple of comments, if I could. Just very interested, we're now a year into this government. There have been some challenges in terms of what was inherited. But how would you see CDL? What would success look like in terms of, in a year's time, how well government is working across government in terms of addressing national security?
I think it's a fast-changing field. We've seen that not just in a year, Mr. Chairman, but possibly in less than a year. And we've had to adopt to a fast-changing environment. I think the Prime Minister has done that extremely well. I think the fact that we have negotiated 3 trade agreements of different kinds with major economic powers in the world is a very significant success in the first year of this government. Many of these trade agreements were sought by previous governments without being able to reach them. The fact that we did, I think, has probably been almost underplayed in terms of its significance. So I think that is very important. And if you ask me to look ahead to the future, what's going to be needed is a level of agility in this changing world that combines our economic and security interests in the best possible way to pursue our national interests, to try to get the investment and the growth that we need, but also to protect the public and to protect our vital security interests. And I think that combination is well understood across government. But in a world that's changing as fast as this one, it does require agility to keep pursuing it.
And notwithstanding the NSA, Jonathan Powell's consummate skills that we discussed earlier, how do you think we should judge him in a year's time in terms of what he's delivered for national security strategy?
Well, I don't think you should load it all on him. He's an employee of the government. Has a role
to play.
He has a role to play, but he's an employee of the government. I think you should judge the government rather than loading it all on the NSA.
He's a significant player.
Yes, he is. And look, I don't want to go over where we began in the session. I think he's doing an excellent job, and he's an excellent person to do the job. But ultimately, the responsibility for the government's performance on national security or anything else rests with the government as a whole.
Okay, on that note, that concludes today's session. Can I thank you, Minister, thank you, Matthew, also, for your witness today. Very much appreciate your time. Thank you to colleagues as well for your forbearance.